Fleaux-o, me say Fleaux-o. OSR come and me want to roll bones. Welcome to the Games of James. I'm James, you're you. Now that the introductions are over, let's get into the games. And today we are going into Fleaux-o. Fleaux-o is an OSR-inspired game that is brought to you by a Kickstarter campaign that I pledged to, but otherwise I have no affiliation to the authors, company, or anyone else. This is brought to us by a person named Kobayashi. Other than that, I don't really know much about them. But let's get right into it. So, Fleaux, it's a French word. It is a word that means scourge or plague. It's one of those words that can mean many things. How do I know this? How did I get this mastery of the French language? Well, Kobayashi provides us with the definition right in the beginning of the book. Wonderful. Love it. Sets the tone right away. One thing I want to take a look at, though, is this front cover. This front cover is absolutely amazing. Look at the artwork. It is one that is, to me, it screams when when I was in high school or early college and I found one of these playbills from a play of a Greek tragedy or something that's done in this psychedelic way. Like, this is the kind of artwork they would have. Love it. Please forgive me, my Chromebook is running a little slow when I'm recording the screen. I don't know why, but today it's not acting right. Shame on you, Chromebook. But, I mean, look at this. Great colors. The city is going to swallow the players alive. It's great. But with that, let's get right into the game in and of itself. You're going to get into the game, and character creation and the rules are nothing groundbreaking. They're nothing revolutionary. But the rules here fit the tone and style of the game. So character creation is pretty straightforward. It's not very cumbersome. It is a simple roll the dice, look on the table, find the corresponding score, and assign it to the stats of your choice. As soon as that page pulls up. The attributes are strength, dexterity, erudition, charisma, guts, melee, and shooting. Pretty straightforward as to what they are. Strength is for lifty, throwy things. Dexterity is moving. Erudition is your intelligence. Charisma, guts. Melee is for hurting, and shooting is for hurting at far away. Again, nothing, this is stuff that you have seen before. You roll 2d6 and you put the attributes in order and you consult the table as to what it is. So if you get a 12, you have a 13. Not 100% sure why we have the chart. But, running through some game mechanic scenarios, it works. But when you are done rolling your stats, you pick your background, because this is a game that does not have classes. It's one of those games where you just really select this vague background and then build your character as they get better by taking different skills, feats, etc. So essentially you're going to make, a character that is more like a real person. So you have an origin. Once you choose your origin, you roll a d6. So you have a human or halfling, dwarf, elf, ogre-blooded. Again, it's nothing, nothing that I'm going to go out and give a fantasy literature award to, but it works. It's great. It's, this is a game that when you are going through it, its totality, its sum is greater than the individual parts. that's the best way that I could put it. It's every little piece. You can trace the stylistic origins back to a lot of different other games, game mechanics to other different games, but Kobayashi puts it together in a great package that fits the feeling of what he's aiming for. One of the interesting things about character creation is that your character is thrust into a adventuring life because they were accused of a crime, and you have a chart, a random table that shows you what kind of crime you're accused of, and then you go from there. Here we go. And a lot of these are just not like petty offenses either. It is, killing a member of your family, robbing a tax collector, heresy, making a pact with a demon, all sorts of fun stuff. Probably crimes that we've been accused of at one time or another. But it is, I think it adds a little something to the game. That, you're not, your existential ennui did not, lead you to a life of adventure. You're fleeing something. Another thing that is great is that you have Goblin as a background, as a character, origin, as a race. I haven't seen too many games that do that. I mean, I think that's really actually pretty creative, and I think it fits the theme of the game. But you also have your profession. This is what you've done before. You were accused of crime and had to leave. And these fit the theme of the game. You're a rat catcher, a smuggler, tomb robber, poacher, hermit, Again, it's nothing super, super groundbreaking, but when Kobayashi collected them and put them together in this game, it created something, I think, really great for this kind of dark fantasy role-playing. It's nothing in and of itself. It's nothing revolutionary. It's all stuff that we've seen before in countless times. But the way he puts it together is something quite extraordinary. Leveling up characters, pretty straightforward. You got a level and your associated benefits. When you every other level or so, you get a talent, gives you an additional ability or additional skill. One thing that I think is actually pretty clever, and I like this, and this is what I will give him. And I'm sorry if Kobayashi does not use male pronouns. I do not know this person personally. I am just going to use male pronouns because that's what I'm used to using. But weapons, no matter what weapons that you have, they're all going to do the same amount of damage. The difference being that if you have a two-handed weapon, you get an advantage on your damage roll. And I think that's pretty clever. Because not only does it make it easy to remember, like you don't have to worry about what does a hand axe do? What die do I roll for a dagger? But also, there is the rule, and Kobayashi did say this in the comment section of the Kickstarter campaign. If you think a weapon deserves some sort of trait or something, just go ahead and do it. Like a lot of OSR games, it's style and substance over the actual rules as written. Another nice thing that I think adds a little bit of flavor to the game is that your character has to keep up with a certain lifestyle by paying a certain amount of treasure. If they don't, there is some minor associated penalties. So there's that, Nice thing, too, is Kobayashi gives us a summary of character creation. This is a handy little tool, because sometimes the rules aren't exactly 100% clear. I don't know if English is Kobayashi's first language, so there might be there is some minor nuances to the language that could be a little bit confusing. So this actually spells that out. It is, I appreciated it. Going to the rules, again, it's nothing groundbreaking. You've seen this type of stuff before. You can get advantages and disadvantages. One thing I like is the usage die. It's a degrading die where, say, let's just, for argument's sake, you have a wand and it has a usage die which is marked by a skull of a d6. If you roll a 1 or a 2 on that d6, that die goes down to a d4, so the next time you use it, if you roll a 1 or a 2 on the d4, then that's it, the item is depleted. I've seen that mechanic used for other types of things where things are supposed to degrade in other games. I haven't seen it as a usage die. So I really like that. And it is one of those things that, again, adds to the overall flavor of the game. I love this particular piece of artwork. That is pretty badass. But yeah, and, Kobayashi does something else that is pretty interesting. This game is supposed to take place in a roughly somewhere between the 16th and 17th century of our world. So he does introduce primitive firearms into the game. And, he's going to tell you in the game, the firearms are not supposed to be super complex. He gives, they're not going to be realistic rules. But he gives them to us in case you want to incorporate them into your game. It is optional. I don't think firearms were supposed to be something that is supposed to dominate your players. He also talks about how you can mix magic and firearms, and tells you that, firearms should not be enchanted in such a way that it inflicts greater damage or that it, increases their firing rate, which is good because that could be a major game-ending or disrupting thing. Combat is pretty straightforward. Again, nothing revolutionary, except that if you want to roll willpower, you can add an effect to your attack, such as adding additional damage, disarming your opponent, or doing a whirlwind attack that will hit friend or foe, anyone that is around you. Nice thing again. So here's an example of how I think the usage die also comes into play with the continuous damage. The continuous damage is rolled like a usage die, so if you're lit on fire, there's rules of taking damage until that fire goes out. I think that's great. But here's a point where I see that translation, the nuances of the language can get lost a little, because it says hit points. When an NPC hit points drop to 0, they die. A character just bites the dust. Once the fight is over, the player rolls a d6. So that could be a little bit confusing, because at least where I'm from, biting the dust means that you have died. Not that you've been knocked unconscious and then you have this chart that you roll. It's it's just minor things like that. Nothing earth-shattering, though. There is magic in this game. Spells are kind of loosey-goosey, and they show you, they tell you basic mechanics of what they do. Nice thing about it is that magic is supposed to represent a corrupting chaos force in the world, so there is penalties if you, cast too many spells per day, or if you fail a roll, you can have some pretty disastrous consequences. And this is, I think, just to make sure that people are just not learning spells and then going around the countryside flinging magic everywhere. There we go. Again, really super awesome artwork. I do enjoy this. Chaos Revenge if you fail a roll for magic. And then you got, the list of spells once it boots up. This Chromebook is killing me sometimes. There we go. So, it's pretty... There's not a lot of structure to it. It's not a lot of... But again, it's not supposed to be. And then, the nice thing is that there is a brief bestiary. The bestiary is... He does go over certain world-specific creatures. Other than that, the bestiary is just a collection of names and stats. It's up to the game master to flesh them out. But if you are an experienced game master, you've seen these creatures before. Again, nothing revolutionary. In this book, the PDF clocks in about 110 pages. The latter half of the book is a sample adventure, which is actually a really well-written, well-done adventure. I do like it a lot. But, so, I've said repeatedly, there is nothing here that is earth-shattering. It's nothing that you've never seen before. But what makes this game so great is the world which Kobayashi teases us with. So at the back of the book, Kobayashi goes over the kingdom, over the lands that your characters would be adventuring in. It is a dark fantasy world, but it's not an over-the-top grimdark. It is brutal fantasy, but it's not like super lethal, your characters are going to die at any second lethality. It is dark, but your characters can represent a glimmer of hope. And Kobayashi just really presents this well. The kingdoms, again, a lot of the kingdoms can be traced back to other fantasy literature. Shakespeare is right. There is nothing new under the sun. We can't help that. But again, it's the way everything comes together in this package that makes it really, really good. So a little history lesson. I grew up on the east end of Long Island. My teen years were spent in the later half of the 90s. My first year of college was in 1997. And back then we didn't have the internet per se. We've had some really limited contact with other role-playing games. So as you've gotten, older and you explore the world more, you get exposed more to games. You start off, with Dungeons and Dragons, which is, a lot of people's gateway drug, and then you move on to other things like, Vampire the Masquerade. It was the late 90s. We were all in our typo negative phase. So Vampire the Masquerade checked out. Shadowrun, Cyberpunk, but then I went off to a local community college. I purposely took classes at a campus that was the furthest from my hometown. And that is where I ran into some interesting and colorful characters. And one of my first, quote-unquote, college things to ever do was I met some guys that were interested in role-playing, and we were talking about other games. We were talking about stuff that we have seen, exploits that our characters have done. One part bullshit, one part exaggeration, bravado. The other is misremembering. But I remember, coming out of class and talking to this one person, and it was pretty late at night. And we went to, afterwards, we were like, look, come on, I'm going to go meet my friends at a diner. So we went to our local diner. And at the table were several people late 30s to late 60s, various stages of beard growth. Your stereotypical nerds, geeks, miscreants, and whatnot. But this was the first time that I've really come across these types of people. Now, I've seen them. They were background characters. I hung out with a few, but this is the first time I'm really sitting down and talking to them. As someone who has studied history, I have a reverence for old things. I have a reverence for people who have gone before and experienced things. And these were people that were there when D&D was first starting, when role-playing was a hobby, was first forming as a hobby. And Fleaux-o is the type of game that they would be playing. This is the type of game that they were talking to me about. They were talking to me about playing games like Stormbringer, other fantasy games that, I've never heard of. Like, they had a copy of Deities and Demigods with Cthulhu in it, signed by, Nyarlathotep himself, And thinking about this game and thinking about the package that it presents, I'm going to tell you the reason why I really like this is because it brings me back to those type of experience. Because Fleaux-o would be the type of game that they would play. So here I was a young whippersnapper in the court of these kings, this meeting of nobles talking about games that they have played, and I am just some young whippersnapper, where I've turned around and said, I played Shadowrun. And they, of course, would hit me with, 50 things about Shadowrun that I didn't know. 50 things about, other games that I've heard of other people playing. These are what games people play. These folks were talking about creating their own games. And it was really a fun and magical night. And this brings me back to that. Because I think also with this whole OSR movement, we are presented with the simulacrum of what has come before us. And a game like this is a simulacra of a half memory of a past that never really existed. It's a memory of our imperfect recollection of these old games, these games that these people have played. And I think that's what Kobayashi is really giving you here. And it's great. I have to tell you, it's kind of like when I was talking about Toxic Lords of the Neon Wasteland. There is that nostalgia there. There is, when I open that book, this warm feeling of nostalgia. With this, it's that, I'm a little bit older. I was, in my late teens, and I'm looking through, Elric books, because Fleaux-o, it's one of those games that has the exclamation point at the end. I got kicked out of my local shop for keep yelling the name. I didn't realize the exclamation point didn't mean not to yell it. But, there is that. So before I sign off, I just want to show one last thing that Kobayashi, I think, has done us a huge favor if you purchase this game. At the end, he gives us this great little summary of the rules, so you can print that out and give it to your players so they have it. Because, again, I am one of those players that are like, get your grubby hands off my book. But he gives us also spell cards that you can print out and keep, on hand, so someone doesn't have to keep flipping through the PDF or flipping through the book to find it. And he gives it to us. You can print them out. It's great. So again, this was a Kickstarter. The campaign has since ended. I don't know if there is plans to bring this back and sold on another website. Drive-Through RPG, Itch, or Exalted Funeral. I really hope that Kobayashi does put this up for sale and distribution. This is a great game. This is a game that, if I were going to try to recruit a D&D player and convert them and show them the wonders of OSR, this is one of the games that I would show them how to play. This is the one that I would show them. It's simplistic, yes. It's derivative, yes. But again, it is greater than the sum of its parts. I urge you to take a look at this if you can. If you could do a late pledge or something, read the book. I would say just get this book just to read it and look at the great art, because I guarantee you it takes you back in time. It takes you back in time to that, for me, that late 90s, talking to these guys that were talking about games that were published in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. It's really well done. I know I'm gushing about the game, but it's just something that I like. So with that, go forth, be awesome, and I will see you next time.